Okay, shalom, shalom, everybody. I have a very special guest with me today. Her name is Marnie Grundman, and she has actually been featured on over 100 major television and radio shows in Canada, the United States, and Europe, all over. But she actually went, as a very young child, she went through a horrific case where she literally spent years living on the streets. Basically now what she has done with her life is she's trying to help children that have gone missing within the foster care system. And since my channel is focused on exposing child sex trafficking, the human trafficking, all of the stuff that's been going on, including a lot of the abuses that have gone on within the foster care system, I really wanted Marnie to come on today and share with us both what she went through as a little girl and then now what she's doing currently to help with this issue. So Marnie, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you and just let you kind of start from the beginning with your story.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, to kind of go backwards, I guess, I was 13 years old when I ran away from home for the final time. I'd actually been running on and off since I was 5 or 6 years old. My family background is one that was riddled with abuse. One of my earliest memories is of my mother dropping me out of a 2-story window, and I was 5 at the time. This is not an unusual story for a child who ends up on the streets. And in the first year and a half, I lived on park benches, in abandoned buildings, apartment complex saunas, until I finally found a job. I lucked into a job, 14 and a half, as a cocktail waitress, of all things. And from there, I managed to get a place to live, and it seemed like things were coming together for me. Unfortunately, at some point in time, I did lose that job, and when I looked for another one, I ended up responding to an ad, and I was trafficked for labor, and went from Miami all over the place, finally escaping in Louisiana. And my story is not unusual. 1 in 6 runaways end up being trafficked. So I think it's really important that we're talking about this, not just because of the experiences that kids who run away go through, and the fact that the majority of them are coming from homes where they have been experiencing some sort of abuse, but also because in not intervening when we know and see that these kids are running, we're also feeding traffickers with more victims, because these are the kids that are the easiest to grab. And by grab, I don't mean kidnap, because that's not how trafficking works. They're the easiest to lure.
Okay, so go into more about that. What do you mean by all of that in terms of easiest to lure?
Well, I mean, think about it. We're the kids that are either living on the streets the way that I was, with no protection, no family, no love, no care, and no food. And you're somebody who is a predator looking to take advantage and make money off of somebody like that. All you have to do is be like, are you hungry? Can I take you in? Can I get something for you? Being just a little bit nice is really, unfortunately, all it takes, because we're so alone and we're so unprotected. Even when I had a place to live, I didn't have anybody who loved me and cared for me and was looking out for me. And I didn't have the life experience to know when somebody was trying to take advantage of me or when they were actually just being nice. I mean, even if you think about it in your adult life now and you meet somebody new, we take people at face value and then find out that maybe they weren't quite what they seemed. Well, now if you magnify that into somebody who actually, is not only not what they seem, but there's somebody with a plan for you. And it's just something that these kids that I myself get sucked into very, very easily. And it was years, I mean, really not until the last year or so that I went, oh my God, I was actually trafficked. I didn't even look at it that way, because the way the media portrays trafficking victims, I should have been held against my will. Well, I wasn't there willingly, in terms of, I wanted to get paid and I wanted to save money and I wanted to get back on my own feet. And I could have walked out, and at one point I did escape. I was afraid of them, and I was also in a situation where I didn't want to end up back on a park bench again.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely very vulnerable. So I guess one question I think probably my audience has is, we have this when we're growing up, if we come from, healthy families, we have this idea that, the foster care system's a wonderful system. It helps children and everything. How is this happening? How is it that so many children within the foster care system are going missing?
So I just want to backtrack a little bit, because I, as a child, thought the same thing. And I think it's very normal for us. We have this idea that every child that is taken out of a home is taken out of a home that is severely riddled with abuse, particularly physical or sexual, and that where they're going to be placed is so much better. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that there are a lot of great foster parents, just like there's a lot of great foster care workers. There's also a lot of really bad ones. We have issues with background checks, in completing them, in making sure that we're placing a child in a safe environment. And as a result, these kids are ending up either in group homes or in foster homes that should never be caring for children to begin with. And so what do? Do you stay for more abuse that you've already come from, or do you run away and try to survive on your own? And a lot of these kids, unfortunately, and the ones that we're talking about right now, are kids that are running away for survival. Where they are is no better than where they were. It may be that they got into a stable foster home and then they were ripped out of that one and put in another one. A lot of people don't realize that most kids in the system, they spend, I think, 21 to 22 months their first time in foster care, and they will see the inside of minimum 3 different residences. Now, somebody comes, plugs you out of your house that's abusive. Let's say you're 10 years old. They don't explain much to you in terms of what you can understand. Your stuff is thrown in a garbage bag, and you're taken to a place where you know nobody and told this is now where you're going to live. And nothing is going to happen from that. I'm not saying that there aren't situations that are better, but the ones that we're focused on are the ones that the kids are running from. They run from these homes. The social workers are overburdened a lot of times. They're not checking on all the kids. They may or may not even know that they're missing. When they're told that they're missing, they may or may not call the police. We definitely know that many of them are not reporting the kids to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is a requirement by law in the United States. It's been on the books since 2014, that is actually the job of the social worker. Even let's say one of my children was in foster care tomorrow. My kids are grown up, but let's say one of my kids was in foster care tomorrow, and I became aware that they went missing from care. I can't call the National Center because I am not their legal guardian. It has to be the legal guardian. So children will go missing for weeks, months, years, and never get reported. And it's easy to track. I mean, we can see it's happening. All you have to do is Google, like Kentucky had, Kansas had 81 kids missing at one point. When that report hit the wires, I went on the National Center's site to see if there were at least 81 kids listed there. There was something like 28 kids missing. 81 are missing, 28 on the site, and maybe none of those are foster kids.
Wow, what a mess. What a mess.
A solvable mess.
Yeah, so talk about some of the solutions that you're promoting to help with this.
Well, look what we're doing right now. We're on Zoom. I can see you. I know you're in your house or your studio. I'm in my house or my studio. Think about a caseworker who's supposed to be checking on however many kids they have under their care. Before we disperse a check, it's a Zoom and it's recorded. It solves 2 problems. One, you physically see that the child is where they're supposed to be, with who they're supposed to be with. And if the child does go missing, now I have an image that's current, so that when I do have to report them missing, there's a missing poster with an image that allows us as the public to be able to look for these kids and bring them back, bring them to safety. So that's number one. We also want a complete inventory. We want a complete head count that happens this way so that we have documentation for all these kids, so that we know who's missing now and who isn't. When they're checked into care, and every 6 months they should have their file updated so that everything is current. And this way nobody can falsify reports. You know, if a child goes missing, the social worker can't say, well, no, I just checked on them last week, so they've been there all week. All we have to do is type into the computer and up comes the file. Well, where's the Zoom or whatever platform for this particular day? It's not there. And I also feel that holding the social workers responsible, the ones that aren't reporting the children where they're supposed to be reporting them as missing, they don't have any accountability. They're like a protected class. And that's wrong, because they are in charge of our most valuable, important resource, which is youth and our future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would think too that this heightened accountability would discourage potential foster parents who would be abusive from even wanting to become foster parents. So it kind of works. I mean, that I would hope that would be one of the results as well.
Yeah, I would definitely hope that would be one of the results. Somebody who is a foster parent and not reporting a child missing and collecting a check, or the group homes, particularly the for-profit homes, it would be a great deterrent in stopping them from doing that. So you would also hopefully be weeding out a particular personality that's given to, illegal and fraudulent behavior, right? So that's definitely something that would help with that. And on the other side of it, the money that's being spent for kids that aren't there, that could be being spent for improving the foster care system and improving the care of these kids. If I called tomorrow, this is the crazy part to me. If you called tomorrow, I always say this, you called and you called the IRS and said, hey, I can't find my tax return from last year. Can you tell me how much I paid in taxes? They can tell you down to the penny. And if it turns out you owed a little money, they'll be able to tell you that right then and there too. Call tomorrow. Call any state child welfare agency. Call the governing body for all of child welfare and ask them how many kids are missing. The response you're going to get is, we estimate 1% of the total number of children in care go missing every year. That's how we got the 4,600 number, because that year there were 460,000 kids in care. They can't tell you exactly how many little human beings are missing and what's happening to them. And then if you hold their hand to the fire, they go, well, we think they just ran home. Oh, you mean the home you took them from? So you're just not going to look for them. And beyond that, there was a report done out of a reporter, Eric Rasmussen, out of Boston. He did a big investigative report, and he found that 110,000 cases of missing foster children from the year 2000 to now have been closed without finding the kids. Don't know what happened to them. 110,000 that we know of, and yet nobody wants to grab onto this story. Nobody. You look at this, when all of these kids were separated at the border, which is absolutely horrific, and the hashtag was, where are the children? Well, we actually knew where those kids were. What about all the kids that were already missing, have been missing, and continue to go missing every week? Where's the hashtag for that? Where's the media all over that? Where are the politicians all over that to make change in their own states? Nowhere. And they know it's happening. It's impossible that they don't.
Right. Absolutely. So talk a little bit about this petition that you have going right now.
So the petition that we have going right now is basically to make the changes that I was telling you about earlier. One being a complete inventory in the system, so that we know what our actual real life head count is. Another is that prior to a check being dispersed either to a foster family or a group home, they have to present the child by video that can be documented by the caseworkers. No video, no check. If the child isn't available within 24 hours, then the social worker needs to assume that they're missing, make a report to the police as required by law. The police then will have them entered into the FBI database. They have 2 hours to do that, also required by law. And then the social worker is further required to immediately contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, providing all of the details surrounding the disappearance. And that's what we're calling to have happen. I mean, it's not rocket science. We're in a data-driven age, and you can't tell me these kids are missing or how many.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, it seems like such common sense, because obviously, if you place a child in a foster family and they're committing abuse, and this child runs away, that foster family is not going to report. They're not going to want to report. They're going to want this covered up. So the social workers that are working within the foster care system, I mean, is this just a case of them being overburdened, or do you suspect there's some other things going on?
I think some of it is overburdened for certain. I mean, from what I hear, and having never been a social worker or walked a mile in their shoes, that's what I know from, secondhand knowledge. I also think that when you have children like I was that are habitually running, because some of these kids that run do return, or they get found fairly quickly and returned back to the home, there's this idea, and law enforcement also perpetuates the same idea, that most of them will just turn up. So there's kind of this feeling of a lack of urgency that definitely should not exist, that does. I read something the other day that said 70% of kids who run away from home will just return on their own. I don't know how accurate that number is, but let's just say it is accurate for argument's sake. What about the other 3 kids, the other 3 out of 10?
Right.
You can't work on these assumptions. We know that within the first 2 to 48 hours of a child being on the streets, a predator or somebody who wants to exploit them will approach them. This is a statistic from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We know this to be fact. Now add to that, you're a foster child. You're that much more vulnerable because you've really been pre-groomed for people who want to hurt you. You have been convinced that you aren't worth any love or any value or any care or any of the very normal little things that most of us take for granted. So the minute somebody looks like they're giving that to you, you're going to suction cup right onto that. It's just, it's a tragedy upon tragedy.
Absolutely. Can you go a little bit more into your story as a little girl? Share what you feel comfortable sharing, but just so that people can kind of understand where you're coming from and why you have such a passion about this particular subject.
So after my mother dropped me out of the 2-story window, both of my arms were broken, and I ended up at some point living at my grandparents' house. And unfortunately for me, my grandfather was a child molester and my grandmother was a functional alcoholic. And I want to make the point to say that I came from a family like a lot of kids who end up on the streets come from. We were certainly middle to upper income. We didn't look like what you think an abusive family looks like. Abuse doesn't know, I always say, whether you're paying for your groceries with food stamps or cash or what kind of car you drive. But we're conditioned to think that nothing bad happens in a pretty house, right, in a nice environment. So as these things are happening throughout the years that I'm growing up, I started, shortly after living with my grandparents, I started running away from home for the day. I was trying to find my biological father, who I ended up finding much later in life. And I would run sometimes 3-4 times a week At that point in time, people weren't really aware of what I was doing because I was too afraid not to get home before dusk. By the time I was 10, I was running away and people knew. Everybody knew. Police would be called. I was only running from my mother's house. We were living in the States at the time in Miami. I couldn't tell you between the ages of 10 and 11 how many times I ran. I could just tell you that people knew. And the assumption was that I was this unruly, belligerent child. Here I was, on one hand, the kid who got great grades in school, never got in trouble, not even a detention. Yet, because I'm running away from home, people are like, well, that's the kid. You know, they're just screaming for attention. She just wants attention. And what law enforcement was doing at the time, and they still use the term chronic runaway, or they labeled me a habitual runaway. So it really just solidified that I was a problem child. And here was my mother on the other end going, woe is me, look, I have this kid, I can't deal with her, I don't know what to do with her. Nobody was really going, okay, what's happening here? What would make a person, a child, leave a house with a bed, a bathroom, 3 meals a day, and continue to try to be on the streets anywhere but in that home? And the reason that I do what I'm doing now is because we're still not asking those questions. We have not caught up with all of the awareness that we have psychologically, with everything that we hear and know about abuse. We still haven't caught up with the part that nobody would choose to live on a park bench over a home if the home wasn't riddled with some sort of issue. And in my case, it was all 3 types of abuse: physical, emotional, and sexual. Almost 80% of kids who run away from home are experiencing one of those 3, if not all 3. And we need to intervene, and it can be done. If I had had someone to go to, if I had a soft place to fall, I would have been able to stick it out. Even if I had been stuck in that house, if I had somebody who was softening those blows, I would have stuck it out. But I had nobody, and nobody was asking.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a stigma against runaways that ought not to be there. And that's very, very good that we should be asking those questions. So how long have you been involved in doing what you're doing now?
I wrote my book 4 years ago, published 3 years ago, so it's been about 3 years now. And when I began, this is not what I thought I would be doing. I really wrote it as a resource for recovering runaways. There was nothing out there for me, and I'd always wanted something to connect to, and that was my original intention. And that's also how I ended up finding out that the stigma is alive and well, and still just as bad as it was when I was a kid.
Right. Okay. So in the past 3 or 4 years that you've been doing this, have you seen positive changes that have been brought about? Or
I've seen personally, I've experienced positive changes just from individuals, person to person, and that sort of ripple effect where somebody will say to me, I had no idea that was going on, and they share it forward with other people. I've seen more people around me personally being involved just with homelessness in general, because we have this idea that it won't happen to me, or we have a tendency to want to walk around people who are experiencing homelessness because we're afraid it will happen to me, kind of thing. And the fact is that each and every one of us is vulnerable, because a lot of people who end up on the streets end up out there because of a traumatic situation. So yeah, I have seen some progress in that area. Not as much as I would like to see, but I'm one person and one voice, and constantly, like talking to you today, trying to expand that awareness. For the first time, I see an agency out there called freedomunited.org, and they are running campaigns to protect runaways and homeless children, specifically highlighting how vulnerable they are to trafficking. I've seen change with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I think it's been about 2 years that they no longer list children as runaways. They only list them as missing. So it's happening. It's just, it needs to be faster because human trafficking is the second fastest and largest growing criminal enterprise in the world right now. And until we're stopping it with awareness, we're starting to decriminalize prostitution in terms of not arresting the girls anymore and the boys. We're arresting the Johns and the pimps, and that's progress. But we also need to attack it on the front end and protect and prevent the victimization in the very first place instead of just continually band-aiding it, right?
Right. Absolutely. Well, I will definitely put this petition below the video so that people can sign it and participate. What are some of the other things that you would recommend people to do in order to help with this problem that we're facing?
Write your representatives in your state and demand answers. The only way that change comes about is through our voices, through noise, through it becoming important. Imagine if every person who signed that petition, every person who sees this video were to take one action, and that's just to call their local representative. That's a lot of numbers. Calling your local media saying, hey, are you aware of this? Why aren't you covering this? We have to demand change. It's not just going to happen. And as I said earlier, I'm one person, Shenandoah Chefalo, who has founded 4600 and counting with me. She was a former foster child that you see on the video attached to the petition. She's only one person. We're two voices, and we need everybody else to band together and to do something about it, not just go, oh, that's too bad, and now we have a dialogue. It requires action.
Absolutely. I want to just let you talk about anything that maybe I haven't touched upon or asked you about that you want to make sure you communicate to my subscribers.
Well, I think the only thing I haven't touched upon is what to do if you know of a kid that's running. And it's not just a matter of saying, hey, why are you running? People did ask me that, law enforcement in particular. And there's a couple of issues with that. One is when you're a child being abused, that's your normal. So if somebody said to me, are you being abused at home? I would have said no, because I didn't know that wasn't going on in everybody else's house. If somebody had asked me and identified with me, hey, I know you must be running for a reason. Do you want to talk about it? Can you tell me what it is that it is causing you this stress? I would have been more apt to answer those questions. There were teachers that I trusted who would have been able to do that. So we need to be proactive, and we need to intervene. We need to get involved. These children are all of our children. And the other thing is, if you don't know what to do, I would contact Covenant House. They've been around for 40 years. There are 30 of them in the US alone, I believe. There's 31 in total. And they have resources. They have resources to give you information on what you can do as a person trying to intervene. They have resources for those children. Even if there's not an actual Covenant House in your area, they can help refer the child somewhere where they can run to instead of ending up on the streets. The house may not be safe. Let's put them somewhere that is. So that would really be my parting thought, is just to remember that these kids are calling for help, not attention, and it's our job to help them.
Absolutely. Yeah, things have really, really gotten backwards, particularly here in the United States. I'm not as familiar with what's going on in Canada or Europe, but I know here in the United States, I've even interviewed a number of people who, they get their children taken from them because of just some random anonymous phone call, right? And there's nothing wrong going on. These kids are not running away. There's no abuse going on. And yet we're hearing now on this other side where when there is legitimate abuse, where the children are running away, nothing's being done. And it's so frustrating because it's like the whole foster care system, the Child Protective Service, all of these organizations, they're supposed to be protecting children, helping families. Instead, it seems like they're ripping apart families that shouldn't be ripped apart. And then they're not protecting the children that need to be protected. And it's just...
well, there's a financial reward. I mean, how many states are for profit? How can you have a foster care system that profits off of the children? What is their incentive to reunify the family?
Right.
You know, it goes against common sense. You can't have these things being for profit. You can't reward them with money for the number of foster children that they have. You have to incentivize reunification and kinship care. How many kids do you know have a grandparent who were willing to take the child, or an aunt or an uncle? That's always a better option than sticking a child with a bunch of strangers who aren't even being properly vetted. You know, this is all very common sense stuff that we're not doing. We're simply not doing it. And the other thing is, too, a lot of people don't realize, if you really suspect a child is being abused, CPS is not who you call. You call the police, because the police are actually they're trained to investigate abuse. CPS is trained to remove children and place them, not the other way around.
Right. Right.
But I didn't realize that. That was something that I've learned in the last 3 years. I never knew that. If I knew a child was in danger, I would have called CPS. It's not who we're supposed to call. We're supposed to be calling the police department, because they're the investigators.
Right. Right. Well, that's very good to know. Very good to know. Yeah. And I totally agree with you. The fact that CPS and the foster care system, that they're getting subsidized by the government for how many children they take, it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
And they pay more for kids who are being drugged. So there's another incentive. So if you have a child who's on any psychiatric drugs, it's a higher rate of pay. And I would venture to bet that if you looked at any group home that's a for-profit home, I bet you that most of the kids that they have are on medication and went on medication in those homes, because it's a significantly higher paycheck.
Oh, that's even more disturbing. As I mean, I'm pretty much opposed to a lot of these medications. I think that they're a complete disaster. Wow. And I really just want to highlight to my audience again the point that she made toward the beginning of the video, which I think we need to remember, is that it's really, really backwards that the IRS will keep meticulous records of how much money we may owe them, or how much money we paid. And yet with our own children, these government agencies can't tell you how many children are missing. They have no idea really. This is a reflection of our government, of our culture, and why we really, 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 really need to be raising our voice about these issues. And like what Marnie's suggesting, we need to be calling our representatives. We need to be active in doing this, not just saying, oh, well, this is a problem, you know, that's horrible. No, we've got to be addressing this, because we cannot continue to live in a culture that treats our children this way. It's just, it doesn't work. And we can't keep on like this. All right, Marnie, I appreciate you being on my show today. I will definitely go ahead and link to this petition, as well as a link to your book that you wrote. Is there any other link that you'd like my subscribers to have that I could put below the video for people to get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me through my website. And if they want to be part of, getting the message out, Twitter's a really great space to connect with me on, because I'm always updating and sharing what's happening there. So if they're on Twitter, they can find me under Marnie Grundman. That would be great too.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Marnie. And thank you everybody else for watching. And again, you can leave comments below the video. Just please, again, whenever I have a guest, please be respectful in your comments. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.